U.S. military service is the number one indicator that someone will commit a mass casualty event.
I wanna start a revolution.
All right, guys, hello and welcome to another episode of Thinking Out Loud. Today we're going to be talking about the recent New Year's terrorist attacks, mass casualty events that happened in New Orleans and outside of the Trump Tower. You guys have probably heard of these stories by now. You had a guy drive through a bunch of revelers in in New Orleans on New Year's, and I believe it was the same day you had a guy who premeditatedly filled his Cybertruck up with cans of gasoline and light explosives and things like that and detonated it outside of the Trump Tower. There's been a lot of news coverage over this sort of stuff. And it's been surprising to see even some of the media touching on the fact that both of these men were U.S. military veterans, right? And so I thought this would be a great opportunity to discuss the long history of U.S. military personnel, both active duty and veteran, being involved in acts of domestic terrorism or mass casualty events. That is your, mass shootings and things like that, right? So today with this video, I have a couple of different sources. I have an article that goes over some recent studies talking about just how prevalent it is for U.S. military personnel to be involved in these mass casualty events or to be involved in terrorist attacks. And I also have a study from 2018, which kind of goes into this as well and kind of corroborates the findings of this more recent study and also gives a somewhat brief synopsis of the history of not just U.S. military personnel being involved in mass casualty events or in terrorist attacks, but of their long legacy of being involved in right-wing militias and hate groups and things like that, right? This is all to say and to point out and to provide some analysis as to how, as we all well know, for those of you watching this channel, the U.S. military is single-handedly the biggest distributor, purveyor of death and chaos and instability on the planet. In the past, we've done videos talking about how U.S. military intervention, in particular in Africa, caused what was it? It was at least a 1,000% increase in terrorism in the region, and we obviously have touched on many different aspects of the long and sordid history of the U.S. empire being involved in coup d'etat, color revolution, Jakarta method-esque styles of political purges, such as in Indonesia, all of these things, right? And so I thought these two tragedies that happened on New Year's would be a great opportunity to provide more analysis as to just how sadistic or dehumanizing the U.S. military, the United States Legion truly is, right? So jumping into this video, guys, jumping into our source material here, I thought I'd start out with this clip here from the famous movie Full Metal Jacket. Now, I'm sure most people watching this channel have probably seen that movie, but I took this clip because it's going to really open up the door for us in regards to our discussion about U.S. military personnel and right-wing extremism. Can't talk today, guys. Sorry. Instances of United States servicemen being involved in mass shootings and terror attacks and things like that. And I wanted to play this clip because, just to point out and to drive home the fact that, this isn't just, Dylan on a left-wing rag here on YouTube telling you, U.S. military veterans are predisposed towards violence and domestic terrorism and extremism. No, this isn't me just saying this. No, this isn't just some anecdotal studies or incidents, right? This is known in the mass culture, right? It is so prevalent and so common, and we know the history of this to a point that it is in the zeitgeist of cultural representation in the United States, right? So go ahead and just play this for you guys. Jump in with it, all right?
Do any of you people know who Charles Whitman was? None of you dumbasses knows. Private Cowboy.
Sir, he was that guy who shot all those people from that tower in Austin, Texas, sir.
That's affirmative. Charles Whitman killed 12 people from a 28-story observation tower at the University of Texas, from distances of up to 400 yards. Anybody know who Lee Harvey Oswald was? Private Snowball.
Sir, he shot Kennedy, sir.
That's right. And do you know how far away he was?
Sir, it was pretty far from that book suppository building, sir.
All right, knock it off. 250 feet. He was 250 feet away and shooting at a moving target. Oswald got off 3 rounds with an old Italian bolt-action rifle in only 6 seconds and scored 2 hits, including a headshot. Do any of you people know where these individuals learned how to shoot? Private Joker.
Sir, in the Marines, sir!
In the Marines. Outstanding. Those individuals showed what one motivated Marine and his rifle can do. And before you ladies leave my island, you will all be able to do the same thing.
Yeah, there you have it, guys. Obviously, a very famous movie, Full Metal Jackets, about the Vietnam War, about a journalist in the Vietnam War and the things that he saw there. The guy that it zoomed in on with the demented look. I won't do any spoilers in case some of you have not seen the movie. Definitely watch that. But anyway, touching on what he said there, the University Tower shooting, this cat that had been in the Marine Corps, been trained in the Marine Corps, he got, like you said, 26 stories up and shot people. And he was up there for a long time before they could get him down, right? Lee Harvey Oswald, now we could get into the killing of JFK. And, I mean, it's been pretty well proven at this point, which it's crazy because it has been proven, but it's still in the zeitgeist that if you say JFK was killed by our governments or government proxy, our deep state, that, well, then you're a crackpot that believes in aliens too, right? But it's been proven. There's been leaked documents like, what's his name? Oliver Stone did the movie JFK. It's like a 4-hour movie that really goes deep into asking the questions of why the the Warren report was bullshit. And anyway, so we could talk about that. But nonetheless, Lee Harvey Oswald was, if you follow the conspiracy, that even if he wasn't the one who shot Kennedy, he was involved as a patsy or proxy, and he had also served in the U.S. military, right? There's a long, long history of this, guys, and we'll get into some more of this. But I just wanted to play that clip for you, just a little fun way to start the video and to drive home that, like, this isn't just me being a crackpot. This is well known within our culture to the point that it's in one of the most famous war movies of all time, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into our first article here, guys. This is from The Intercept. It says, U.S. military service is the strongest predictor of carrying out extremist violence. The mass murder in New Orleans and Cybertruck explosion in Las Vegas fit a troubling pattern among U.S. veterans, research says. Jumping in here, it says the 2 men who carried out apparent terror attacks on New Year's Day, killing 15 people by plowing a pickup truck into a crowd of New Year's revelers in New Orleans and detonating a Tesla Cybertruck outside a Trump hotel in Las Vegas, both had U.S. military backgrounds, according to the Pentagon. And it's the Pentagon pointing this out, too, which is pretty wild to see, right? And like I was saying, even some mainstream coverage of it on the news media. From 1990 to 2010, about 7 persons per year with U.S. military backgrounds committed extremist crimes. Since 2011, that number has jumped to almost 45 per year, according to data from a new unreleased report shared with The Intercept by Michael Jensen, the research director at the National Consortium for the Study of Terrorism and Responses to Terrorism, or START, at the University of Maryland. So I want to point out that increase there, guys. From 1990 to 2010, 7 persons per year with U.S. military backgrounds. Even then, as we'll see in a study I'll get into later, they were still, by and large, the largest predictor. Being in the U.S. military, active or a veteran, was still the largest predictor that you would commit a extremist act or a mass killing, mass casualty event. But since then, that number has jumped, looks like, 8-fold. Okay? And now I just wanted to highlight that because this is a result of the endless wars since 2001. And the fact that U.S. military personnel have been involved more actively. Now we know the long history of U.S. empire around the world, U.S. interventions. But since 2001, more and more troops have been involved in these directly. U.S. military servicemen have been involved directly, even if they weren't involved in a full-scale war like Iraq or Afghanistan. But there were troops involved in Libya. There's troops involved in Syria. There's still the ongoing Syria occupation, still occupation of Iraq. And the list goes on and on and on, right? There are military servicemen all over the world and in certain pockets of the world where they are, if not involved in a direct conflict, are on the precipice of that every single day, protecting American interests, right? So this is a direct correlation to the increased amount of wars that we have seen our government and our society involved in, correlating back to a large increase in U.S. military servicemen committing acts of terrorism or mass casualty events. Military service is also the single strongest individual predictor of becoming a mass casualty offender, far outpacing mental health issues, according to a separate study of extremist mass casualty violence by the researchers. So I want to point that out as well. We hear a lot of times the discussion around school shootings, discussion around mass shooting events like in movie theaters, churches, clubs, and things like that. We hear, well, it's a mental health crisis. And yes, it is, by and large, a part of that is a huge aspect of it. Another huge aspect of it is a mental health crisis developing as a result of what's known as moral injury. And obviously this coincides with PTSD in veterans. But moral injury refers to, it's an aspect of PTSD or is related to PTSD. Moral injury is when someone involved in military service or something of that nature, something traumatic, it's not about necessarily that they were traumatized by the acts of like shell shock. Oh, this bomb so much it shocked, it destroyed my nervous system. It's more about this individual did acts, be they murdering of innocents, what's the word I'm thinking of? Collateral damage, whatever it may have been. This individual did acts that are contrary to who they view themselves to be as a person, and that damages their psyche. You know, most human beings on this planet believe that killing is wrong. So therefore, when an individual kills, and then especially in context of war where they're told we're fighting this war due to this reason, and yes, it's unfortunate that innocent people die, but blah, 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 it has to happen because we have to, and then they find out later that that was all bullshit, which was the case, of course, with every single war the United States has been involved in the Middle East. They end up with a condition or a psychological break known as moral injury, right? So that is a huge part of that as well. And then, you know, there's been studies and analysis and philosophers of different stripes who have talked about also, you know, one of the, I would guess, I don't have statistics here for you guys, but I would assume one of the largest, second largest perpetuators of mass casualty events and domestic terrorism are white males. And this is, of course, a result of the disenfranchisement of the white male as patriarchy has kind of, in a sense, crumbled around a decaying economy where the American dream is no longer available. You know, there was a time where a single white male, and I say single white male because black people, Latinos and stuff, were barred from this level of middle class, working class lifestyle, right, by and large. But as that has decayed for the suburban white middle class, where the male can no longer provide for his house, for his household, they can no longer own homes or in all this debt, that creates, I don't want to say moral injury, but that causes self-esteem issues, which inevitably lead to crisis because they feel like they are no longer filling a role in society. And it sends them down this trajectory involved with, you know, the alt-right, far-right pipeline that we see through internet and culture, leads them down into extremist views, which in the end leads them to commit some of these horrifying atrocities, right? All of it is intertwined, guys. Let's see here. From 1990 through 2023, 730 individuals with U.S. military backgrounds committed criminal acts that were motivated by their political, economic, social, or religious goals, according to data from the New START report. From 1990 to 2022, successful violent plots that included perpetrators with a connection to the U.S. military resulted in 314 deaths and 1,978 injuries. Significant number of this came from the 1995 bombing of the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. In the latest attacks, the FBI identified 42-year-old Shamsuddin Jabbar as the man who rammed a pickup into New Year's revelers on Bourbon Street in New Orleans. Early on Wednesday morning, at least 15 people were killed and 35 more were injured. The U.S. Army said Jabbar served as a human resource specialist and an information technology specialist between 2007 and 2020. His service included a deployment to Afghanistan from February 2009 to January 2010. A staff sergeant at the end of his service, Jabbar was inspired by the Islamic State terrorist organization, according to a short address by President Joe Biden on Wednesday night, who added that, in videos posted to social media shortly before the attack, Jabbar indicated that he had a desire to kill. The FBI said it did not believe he was solely responsible for the attack and said the investigation was live. So, excuse me, we can ruminate on this. We have also seen some of this where active military or former military personnel have defected, so to speak, to ISIS or other, Islamic Jihad organizations. Now, I have not seen any of the videos of Jabbar. I was not able to find them. If you have them somewhere, I know there's some of our spooky folks, spooky comrades there on Twitter and Reddit and stuff that have a way of digging things out, which I find y'all are the real cyberpunks, and I appreciate you. Use some of that information and those resources quite often on this channel. But I have not seen any of those videos, and I cannot verify the claim I'm about to make. So take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt. But I sometimes feel like these instances of saying, they were inspired or affiliated with ISIS are oftentimes a justification to detract away from the fact that they had been active military personnel, right? Because the ruling classes and the media would rather people be upset at Arab Americans, at Muslim Americans, rather than starting to have the conversation we're having now, that one of the costs of empire is that it turns our young men into killing machines, into murderers, and then they come back to our society and are integrated back into our society, and that causes severe issues that sometimes turn into mental health crises, which then spiral into mass casualty events or terrorist attacks, right? So I just want to point that out, that this could be a sort of, what's the word? A detraction, a projection. They don't want us to think about how they were active military personnel. They want us to think about, radical Islam, it's still our enemy, right? Going on here, guys, says authorities are also investigating whether the terrorist attack in New Orleans is linked to the Cybertruck explosion in Las Vegas, which killed the attacker, Matthew Liebelsberger, and wounded 7 bystanders. The U.S. Army told The Intercept that Master Sergeant Matthew Allen Liebelsberger served in the active duty Army from January 2006 to March 2011, then served in the National Guard from March 2011 to 2012, followed by a stint in the Army Reserve from 2012 of July through December 2012. That same month, he rejoined the Army serving as U.S. Army Special Operations soldier. So that is an interesting anecdote there, Special Operations. And I don't want to sound too crazy conspiratorial, but there is a long documented, as in government documents via FOIA requests, via WikiLeaks, of the U.S. Army being involved in drug cartels for, illicit revenue streams. They've been involved in funding death squads. They've been involved in backing Al-Qaeda. Perhaps the most contemporary example of that is HTS in Syria. I mean, that was an Al-Qaeda offshoot that was armed and trained by the U.S. and by allies like Turkey and Israel. The U.S. used U.S. military personnel in conjunction with right-wing Cubans during the Bay of Pigs. I mean, there's tomes, annals, tomes, dust-bound tomes of this, of the U.S. military using its military personnel to perpetuate acts of terrorism, false flags of all shapes, coups d'etats, color revolutions, and on and on and on, right? This is not me being a crackpot. It's verifiable. Going on here, it says in the years 1990 to 2022, 170 individuals with U.S. military backgrounds plotted 144 individual mass casualty terrorist attacks in the United States, according to Star Research. These troops and veterans represent approximately one quarter of all individuals who plotted mass casualty extremist attacks during this span, outstripping their representation in the U.S. population. And going back to what I said earlier, I want to combine that fact with the disenfranchised white males leaning into right-wing extremist, fascistic, or Christian fanatical ideologies being another large quadrant. Sorry, I can't talk today, guys. If you put those two groups together, which there's a lot of spillover between them, active military and former military personnel going into these extremist groups and these going back and forth, right? I would say that would make up the vast majority of these attacks. And then, of course, there are some Islamic jihadist attacks. I think a figure said something like, says here 15%. But still, by and large, are disenfranchised military servicemen or disenfranchised white males. This is the two number one indicators that someone will do a mass shooting or a terrorist attack in the United States. The researchers also determined that subjects in Prius with U.S. military backgrounds are 2.4 times more likely to be classified as mass casualty offenders than individuals who did not serve in the armed forces. This means that the U.S. military is a more reliable predictor for becoming a mass casualty offender than mental health issues, being a lone offender, or having a pre-radicalization criminal history. Most mass casualty offenders with U.S. military backgrounds in Prius, 73%, were associated with far-right domestic extremist groups and movements. Approximately 15%, that's 24 offenders, were inspired or connected to foreign Islamic extremist groups. Both Livelsburg and Jabbar spent time at the military base formerly known as Fort Bragg, now called Fort Liberty, a massive Army garrison in North Carolina that is home to multiple Army Special Operations units. It does not, however, appear that assignments to the base overlapped. I'm actually going to go ahead and skip that part, and we'll jump into this next part. But yeah, guys, a lot of information there, a lot of statistics there for you, verifying what I'm trying to say. U.S. military personnel being involved in the U.S. military, being associated with a far-right belief system, a fascistic belief system, that's your 3%ers. That's your Boogaloo Boys. That's your Proud Boys. Being associated with one of those groups or being involved in the U.S. military is the number one indicator that someone will commit a domestic terrorist attack. A number one indicator declaring that they will be likely to kill U.S. citizens, their own countrymen, right? And the news media, and they want you to believe that the left, that China, is the biggest threat to Americans' lives. Different, or Russia or whatever, what have you, or Islamic Jihad. No. The number one threat to safety and the long-term stability of our country, the number one purveyor of political violence in this country, are right-wingers, are fascists. All right, let's go ahead and jump in here to our next thing. I just have this quick little anecdote. It's from the U.S. Medicine Association, the voice of federal medicine. This correlates with a study, International Journal of Research Environmental Health, just showing how this violence, the violence of war, the violence of empire, worms its way into every aspect of American life. According to a 2018 study, 36% of women, 34% of men experience physical violence, sexual violence, or stalking by an intimate partner in their lifetime. Those numbers go up for veterans and service members, with some estimates reaching as high as 58%. Active duty servicemen are 3 times more likely to perpetuate IPV than civilians. So just a quick little anecdote there. Some anecdotal statistics. This goes along with law enforcement. Law enforcement are, I think the figure I saw, do not quote me, I'm pretty sure we covered it in the past video, 40% of police officers, 40% of law enforcement beat or abuse their spouses in some way. 40 fucking percent. Okay. Let's go on here, guys. Jumping in. We're going to just touch on a quick section of this. I know what you're saying. Oh, fuck, a study. This is from a statement before the House Committee on Veterans Affairs. Okay, so this is not, again, a left-wing rag, a left-wing think tank, a left-wing party. It's from the Veterans Affairs Committee of the United States Congress, the heart of the American Empire. Violent domestic extremist groups and the recruitment of veterans. Okay? Very legit. I'm pulling out all the stops today, guys. We're getting real paperwork in here. Okay, we'll skip over some of this and jump into this. The historical trends that we talked about. I'm going to go over a quick synopsis of some more instances of U.S. military personnel being involved in terrorist attacks, being involved in right-wing fascistic organizations. A small, though concerning number of military personnel have been involved in domestic extremism over the years. The Vietnam War and other political, economic, and social factors led to a consolidation and expansion of white power activists who attempted to recruit active duty soldiers, reservists, and veterans. In 1970 alone, the U.S. Marine Corps recorded over 1,000 incidents of racial violence at installations in the United States and Vietnam, including violent altercations between black and white Marines at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. While most of these were not acts of terrorism, they still contributed to an enabling environment for extremist acts. Because the U.S. military is fascistic. The U.S. government, the U.S. military, U.S. society as a whole is fascist. Okay? Every bit as fascist as Nazi Germany. It's just that many of us living in the Imperial Corps still suffer or still enjoy certain privileges, being white and working class or wealthier compared to the global majority, that we do not always see the direct boot of the fascist tendencies. But ask anyone living in a low-income neighborhood, ask anyone living in the global south, is the United States the good guys? No. No one thinks that. Only Americans think that because they've been propagandized. In the same way that people living in Nazi Germany thought they were doing the right thing and we got to get rid of the Jews because it makes sense. That's American citizens. They are every bit as propagandized as those living under Nazi Germany by their fascist government. With this too, I want to point out, so hate crimes here, and that was just 1 year. It's an epidemic, hate crimes in the U.S. military. So is rape. Either raping male counterparts or, the legacy of women as military personnel being raped by their commanding officers and their comrades, colleagues, is horrifying. Horrifying. I would wager to bet that it probably outstrips every other modern society on the planet, the amount of rape that happens. Unfortunately, I don't have statistics for you, so don't quote me on it. In addition, several influential extremists in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s were veterans. For instance, one of the most prominent white supremacist figures was Louis Beam, who enlisted in the Army when he was 19 and fought in the Vietnam War. In his speeches and writings, including his influential Essays of a Klansman, Beam argued that activists needed to continue waging the war on U.S. territory using guerrilla warfare. Beam was not alone. Randy Dewey, a member of the white supremacist group The Order, was an Air Force veteran and instructor at the Survival School of Fairchild Air Force Base in Spokane, Washington. Randy Weaver, a Christian identity adherent who held white supremacist and anti-government views, and who was involved in the 1992 Ruby Ridge standoff near Naples, Idaho, was a former U.S. Army engineer, Timothy McVeigh, who carried out the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing that killed 168 people and injured more than 680 others. Enlisted in the U.S. Army in 1988 and fought in Iraq during Operation Desert Storm. There were other veterans involved in extremism, such as William Potter Gale, Richard Butler, Bo Gritz, Fraser Glenn Miller, and Eric Rudolph. That is a long list already, and that is the tip of the iceberg. Okay? Imagine what it's like overseas. If we're not just talking about domestic terrorism, imagine the horror that American servicemen have inflicted on people all over the world. I don't need to remind you guys of Abu Ghraib prison. That's the one that we found out about, guys, out of thousands of sites, probably just like it, under the dominion of the American Empire. Fuck. It ain't looking good, you know? Let's polish this off here, guys. Among the most prominent white power books during this period was The Turner Diaries, a dystopian novel that drew heavily on the concept of military personnel as white power soldiers. Written by William Pierce and published under the pseudonym Andrew MacDonald, The Turner Diaries depicts a violent revolution in the U.S., which leads to the overthrow of the federal government, a nuclear war, and a race war that results in the extermination of non-whites. I just want to point out, none of this should be surprising, guys, because if you just put aside what you fucking make-believe, your fantasy fiction about the United States, everything you learned in high school was fantasy fiction. Everything you learned about the U.S. in high school was fantasy fiction. It was fan fiction, like on those old websites. Remember those on the internet back in the day? Like, you go on forums and they'd be like Harry Potter or like, I don't fucking know. And they do weird sex shit on the and the stories. Okay. American History 101 is that George Washington tenderly sucked the nipples of Abraham Lincoln. It's bullshit. It's all bullshit. The actual story of the U.S. Empire, the founding of the United States, is genocide, enslavement, death, ecocide, mass murder, theft, killing at gun barrel, killing by sword, burning villages, shooting children. That's the founding of America. Okay, and that legacy goes all the way on through till today. They've just gotten really good at wrapping it up in corporatees and democracy and human rights. It's all bullshit, guys. Every ounce of it. So none of this should be surprising. You're probably like hearing this if you're not used to these kind of conversations. You're probably hearing this and being like, wow, that's fucking wild. The Ku Klux Klan guys and the military, and the police too. Wow. That's it. Like that's the normal. This is not a fluke. That's what it's always fucking been. Always. So it shouldn't be surprising. Anyway, in a reference to U.S. military's experience fighting communist governments and insurgent groups across the globe, the protagonist, Earl Turner, notes, "We have led the example of decades of guerrilla warfare in Africa, Asia, and Latin America to instruct us. William Pierce's National Alliance, a white supremacist and neo-Nazi political organization, attempted to recruit military and law enforcement personnel." And this doesn't say it because it's Congress. They were successful. Big time successful. According to FBI data, 37% of lone offender terrorists in the U.S. between 1972 and 2015 served in the military. But the decade after September 11, 2001, there were relatively few attacks by active duty reservists or even veterans, though extremist groups attempt to infiltrate the military, but the trends recently began to change. Last thing here, guys, we're running over time. On January 19th, 2021, for example, the FBI and U.S. Army Counterintelligence Coordinating Authority arrested a U.S. Army soldier Cole James Bridge at Fort Stewart after he conspired to blow up the 9/11 Memorial in New York and attempted to provide support to the Islamic State. On July 25, Daniel Perry, an active duty Army sergeant, shot and killed a protester in Austin, Texas. On June 10th, 2020, the FBI arrested Army Private Ethan Melzer, who sent sensitive U.S. military information to the Order of the Nine Angels, an occult-based neo-Nazi and white supremacist group, in an attempt to facilitate a mass casualty attack on Melzer's Army unit. On May 29, this is just 2020 and 2021, guys, we're talking about. Air Force Staff Sergeant Stephen Carrillo, a supporter of the Boogaloo Boys, who wanted to ignite civil war, shot and killed Pat Underwood, a protective security officer, and wounded his partner in Oakland, California. Carrillo also killed a Santa Cruz County Sheriff's deputy in Ben Lomond, California, with an assault rifle. And I just want to point out, this goes on and on here, guys. I do want you guys to take a quick glance at this graph. Percentage of domestic terror attacks and plots perpetuated by active duty and reserve service members. It is going through the roof. Anyway, guys, that's really all I have for you. I'm running over time here, so we'll go ahead and cut it down. But I just want to share this with you, this information with you, because, you know, this is the rippling effect of these wars we've been involved in. This is the rippling effect of empire. The horror that we unleash on black and brown people around the world, the societies that we've destroyed, the innocent people we've murdered for the sake of corporate elites. That violence is slowly but surely coming back home to us and slowly but surely escalating. And these elements are in the U.S. military. They are in the courts. They are in law enforcement. They are in your neighborhood. If you've ever seen that logo on the back of somebody's truck, it's a circle of stars with a Roman numeral 3. That's a fucking 3%er. If you've ever seen the Oath Keepers, I mean, they're everywhere, guys. And I'm not saying that that guy is going to suddenly be a terrorist attack, but the infrastructure of fascism, both the courts, the military itself, the law enforcement, and the wider civic society, these aspects have cells of far-right extremist fascistic entities growing and amalgamating and working together. And as we see through the Trump and the people he's involved with in the slow takeover of the Democratic Party by big money, really every aspect of American society is being subsumed by fascism. And it's extremely terrifying. And a lot of people don't notice it because as compared to, say, Augusto Pinochet's Chile or Nazi Germany or Benito Mussolini's Italy or any of these things, it's been happening slowly over decades. And the media covers it up in a way where it becomes insidious and unseen. But make no mistake, it is around you every day. There are killers around you every day. And it's not immigrants, and it's not poor black people. It's former U.S. military personnel, the people we are meant to honor and fetishize in this society. But that's what veterans are. And I'm not trying to, you know, shit on or dishonor veterans as a whole. People join the U.S. military for a lot of different reasons. As we see, there's a lot of U.S. military veterans who come out of their service and start to lean left because they realize what the war was about and who the war actually benefited, and they actually awaken and become class consciousness. And for all those veterans that are leaning that way, solidarity forever. Those veterans will be the leader of revolution. They will. We've seen that also. But for every one of those, there's likely, admittedly, 100 that lean towards fascistic tendencies. And I can't even say it's their fault. Our society is fascist. Our talking heads are fascist. Our internet algorithms endorse fascism. Increasingly so. There's news coming out now that, you know, Meta, Elon Musk obviously is in bed with the Trumpists and the MAGists. This trend is only going to continue. And since it is this pipeline, these young men coming out of military service that are, you know, having moral injury, like we talked about, or are disenfranchised with what they thought American empire was, instead of becoming actually conscious about who the enemy is and who has fucked them and their family and their countrymen, they're leaning into fascistic madness. So this trend is only going to continue to grow. And what a clear sign of the endemic sickness, the nihilistic sickness of violence that is swallowing the American soul. Anyway, guys, again, that's all I have for you. Don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, drop a comment for me. If you want, you can support my independent media work on Patreon at patreon.com/ patreon.com/entitledmillennials. You can also support my independent media work with one-time donations through PayPal at paypal.me/entitledmillennials. Those are greatly, greatly appreciated. I could use some new equipment, guys, because let me show you quick. If I can show you. I've got this staying in place with a rubber band. So, and times are hard in general anyway. So donations are appreciated. Anyway, guys, take it easy. I love talking issues with you. Love hanging out with you. And I look forward to speaking with you all again real soon. Bye for now.
I wanna start a revolution.